Today on our 2017 Chevrolet Express, we're going to take a look at and show you how to install the Firestone Air Command 1 standard duty air compressor system. With an analog gauge, it offers single function. Part number is F2158. Now here's what our compressor looks like installed. It's designed with grommets at its connection point. That's going to help to reduce any vibration being sent into the vehicle frame, which then we'll kind of be able to feel from inside of the vehicle. So that helps to isolate that nicely. Now this is a standard duty compressor, but it's a very good quality. This is going to work with systems that have even up to a 1-gallon air tank. So for your light and medium duty needs, it's a really good one to have on board. Now it also comes with a relay. This is going to be in line. This is going to take the load of powering the compressor off of our switch and use the switch just to turn the relay on and off, sending power through to our compressor. This helps the system last much longer than it typically would with just a switch setup. Now the gauge on the Air Command 1 system allows us to monitor and control one set of airbags, be it front or rear. You can see our gauge marked off in tenths here so we can fine tune the amount of air that we have in our bags. And then, like now we're at 30, if we press down on that, it's very quick to get down to maybe if we just need 20 psi. This really helps us level out all those loads that we might have. Sometimes they're heavier, sometimes they're lighter, but this will allow us to adjust and keep everything on our vehicle running as it should. When we're ready to inflate, we'll just press the lever up. You can see there we've gone from 20 psi up to 30 psi again, giving us the load leveling capabilities. The gauge is also backlit for nighttime use, so if we need to hook up to something and level it out at night, we'll be able to see our psi there. And I like the gauge because this also helps us monitor and helps us to ensure that we're not losing any air pressure in our bags. If we see this starting to drop and we haven't made any changes, we'll know we have a leak and we need to get it addressed. And we were going to find a safe area to get our compressor mounted. You can see under the Express here, we've got a pretty decent amount of room on our frame rail here. So you can choose whether you want to do it up a little bit higher back here, kind of tuck it in here. I think with our actuator being here, our better location would probably be back in this area a little bit. And make sure we've got it level. And then I'm going to use a scribe. It's actually a pick. But I'm going to mark all 4 of those hole locations without my compressor moving. Now in typical applications, you're going to use the provided hardware. As you can see, you've got a screw, a couple washers, and then a nylon lock nut. That would be if you had access to one side or the other of your frame. We've got a box frame here, so we're not going to be able to get inside there and put the nut or the washer on. Instead, we're going to be using a self-tapping screw. We are going to put one of the washers on there when we secure that down. That'll kind of isolate the bearing that we have in the compressor. So for our self-tappers, we're going to drill out our appropriate sized hole. If you're going to be using the screw, you'll want to use the appropriate sized bit for that. Then we'll want to drill out all 4 locations. Now we'll align our holes with the holes that we've drilled out there. You'll see that little brass bushing in there. You don't want to crush that or deform that. You just want your screw to come down to where it makes contact with it. Now as we put our last screw in, I also like to use that to ground out our system. So we're going to slide that right behind the compressor. We'll bring our fastener through that. Now we're also going to get our relay installed. Now the relay does a great job of turning our compressor on and off with just a little signal. It's not going to run all the power from our compressors through our switch wire. It's going to run it through the battery wire. So this is just going to turn that relay on and off, which allows it to send out power to the compressor. So that's of course going to need to be within this length of our compressor. We do have spade fittings there we can use if we want to connect them. We're going to be replacing that with a butt connector. First, let's get this mounted up. Like this area, it's going to be a fine area to mount it. It'll keep it semi-protected. Let's get our hole drilled just like we did for our compressor. Now we're going to use the self-tapping screw here and get it secured. Now we can bring the red wire from our compressor and the orange wire from our relay. We're going to zip tie them off right there. First, let's make our splice. We'll get them both trimmed off. As we said, you can plug those spade connectors together if you want, but you might run into corrosion down the road. We're going to add in a heat shrink butt connector, which would be part number DW05744. We just want to slide that on and crimp it down. Now we'll use a heat source to shrink that down. We can use a little lighter, we can use a mini torch, or even like a heat gun. That's going to give us a watertight connection. We won't have to ever worry about corrosion here. We'll use a couple of the provided zip ties here. We can zip tie our wires off so we won't have to worry about them moving around. All right, now my red and white wire, I'm going to tape these up. This is more just in an effort to kind of keep them bundled together while we run them forward there. Now we're going to start running these up forward. It'll be our white wire and also our fuse holder there that'll go to the positive battery source or 12-volt power source up there. And we're going to zip tie these off really well too. We don't want them moving around, and we need to avoid any kind of sharp edges, significant sources of heat, or any pinch points, which is the same thing we'll do with our airline tubing, of course. Now we'll add the push to connect fitting to the end of our compressor here. We just need to thread that in. We're going to tighten that down so that we get plenty of that thread sealant down in the threads. Now we'll add our airline tubing into it, and we're going to route it just about the same way we did our wire there. Now we want to be sure we have a nice clean cut on our airline tubing. That should be really flush. We're using a tubing cutter. This is part number F9009. Once that's done, we're just going to slide that in. It's going to come to a stop point. Then we need to slide it in. It'll be about another 1/4 inch. Just like that. Then you should be able to pull on it without it coming out. I'm going to zip tie these off pretty good for now, but we are going to have another airline that runs from our gauge back to our airbag, so I'll probably run that right along with these, so I'm not going to get too crazy with zip ties for now. You can see we've got a grommet located here in the floor of the van. We're going to cut a small hole in that. We're going to use that. It comes out pretty much right underneath the driver's feet there. And we'll try to run up along that firewall and bring out our airline tubing under the dash. Now we're going to pop out our side panel here, or the kick panel. It's going to have a couple clips in there we want to release. Just going to slide that out, get it out of the way. It should allow us to pull our carpeting back some. We'll reach underneath there and try to get a hold of that wiring right here where it's coming through the grommet. Now before we pull the airline tubing all the way in, I'm going to run my white wire in. I get rid of the spade connectors. Those can eventually come apart on us. We're going to replace that with a butt connector. That'll be later once we're inside the vehicle though. But I'm going to use my airline tubing to pull this up in the vehicle for me. Just use some of the black electrical tape, tape it off there. We'll pull the rest of our wiring through. The excess that we have on here, we're going to use these to make our ground wires, so don't cut any of it off just because it's a little too long. Now we're going to continue running our fuse holder forward, zip tying it off as we go here. And we're going to the front driver's side. It's going to be really low there. We've got a fuse panel, kind of like a power distribution center there, and we're going to use the positive stud there to connect to. Now the major thing we want to avoid as we come up this way is going to be the steering stem. If we follow these lines here, that should keep us right underneath it and should also get us right there where we want to go to connect. Now we'll reach in and get our wiring pulled on up here. We're going to make sure you get it all up through. You don't want any hanging down below the vehicle. And then we'll zip tie it off down here for another good anchor point. All right, if we pull these two tabs, we've got one here and one down a little lower. We can take the cover off that distribution center, and we'll see the stud right there we can connect to. Now the last thing we're going to need to pass from the inside of the car to the outside of the car is going to be the airline tubing that actually runs to the airbags. So I'm going to take the end of the tubing that we have in the vehicle here. I'm going to tape it pretty much right back to itself, just really close to that grommet. Then we'll be able to pull down on that airline and bring this one outside the vehicle. That's going to leave us with a loop here in the vehicle. What we want to do, you can see I've marked the line that comes from my compressor. I want to make sure I have enough length for that first to connect up to my gauge. Once I've established that I have enough there, then we can trim that off. We're going to run both of those lines as well as our white wire underneath our carpet so they come out up against the firewall. Now right underneath the dashboard here there's a black panel. It's open above it, so we're going to run the air line and our white wire above that. That'll keep everything up and out of the way. Now we'll bring those up. There's a cable that runs right beside the gas pedal, or the base of the gas pedal there, so we'll zip tie right off to that. That'll keep everything up nice and neat. Now you can pick your own location for your gauge, of course, and get it wherever you'd like to have it. Once we've got that where we want it, we'll mark off our mounting locations. Now we'll verify there's nothing behind the dashboard that we have to worry about damaging. And we'll drill our holes out with a 3/16 inch bit. Now we'll place one of our flat washers on our gauge. We'll bring our bolt up through. And then behind that panel, we need to add on another flat washer and also a nylon lock nut. All right, now let's trim our airline tubing. We'll split it pretty much right down the middle. Now the airline that runs out to the airbags needs to go on the barbed fitting behind the gauge. And the one that comes from the compressor needs to go on the barbed fitting behind our switch. Now the white wire coming off the back of our switch that's closest to the middle of the gauge is going to be the one we'll connect to the white wire that comes up from our compressor. We're going to be using a blue butt connector. The part number is DW05714. Since this is inside the vehicle, we'll just be using a standard non-heat shrink variety. So we'll strip back our wire from our compressor, do the same thing to the wire off the back of our switch, and we'll get them connected. Now we can splice together the other white wire from our switch and the lower wire on the back of our light. Twist them together and add another one of our blue butt connectors. Now to the other side, we're going to add on what we have left over from the white wire that came up from the compressor. Now I'm going to run the end of that white wire back over top of the panel that we brought our air lines in. Now we can get that secured with a zip tie and we'll get it grounded out. And we're going to secure that with a number 12 self-tapping screw. Get our hole started here. And we'll also add on a ring terminal. Once we've got our hole created, here's about how much length we'll need there. We'll add on a ring terminal, and you'll want to use whatever size that's appropriate for the fastener that you're going to put on. Now we can take what's remaining from our white wire, and we're going to pass that into the vehicle. You can see right over here on the firewall we've got a grommet. There's already been a few wires passed through there. We're going to pass this one through it. Once we have a little bit of that passed through, we can go inside and grab it. You can see right up here where that comes through our firewall. We're going to bring that up. So let's get the end of that stripped back. We'll be adding this right onto the wire that comes out of the back of the gauge so we can get that illuminated at night. Now I've run out of the zip ties that came with the kit, so at this point I'm just using some extras that we had on hand. Now we're going to connect that underneath our fuse panel here. We're going to use the locks kind of at the top and the bottom, and you just squeeze them together and you can lift that cover up and out. We're going to add in a fuse tap. You can see there's already been one added. We're going to be using fuse number 54. This is going to be in the second row up from the bottom left corner, and it's going to be the fourth fuse over. Pull that out. And we're going to mark the length we need to make it to our fuse box. I'm going to snip that off. And again, since this is going to be outside the vehicle, I'm going to remove the blue butt connector, and we're going to replace it with a heat shrink. We'll add it to our white wire. In the lower section, we want to replace the fuse that we had removed. In the upper one, we'll add our new fuse. We're going to be using a 10 amp. Slide that in, and then that slides right back where we removed it from. You see we've already got a small notch cut out here for the other fuse tap so it could go through. So we'll do it right beside that and enlarge it slightly. Now to get around that post that we're going to use, we're going to need a little bit larger ring terminal than what comes with the kit. This one's going to have a 3/8 inch opening on it. I'm going to crimp that onto the end of our fuse holder there. Let's take the cap off the fuse holder. See, we've got our 25 amp fuse in there. We're going to pull that out. Now at this point, you see we've got quite a bit of extra red wire. If you like to, you can bundle this up and zip tie it off somewhere. But if you'd like to alleviate most of that, what we'll be able to do, come down here, figure out about what we're going to need, and we can trim this up. We'll add a butt connector. We'll also shorten up the lead from our fuse holder. Place the butt connector on and crimp it, and then crimp it down to our red wire that we have coming up from the compressor. Now we'll use a 10mm ratchet. We're going to remove that nut from the stud. We're going to use the one closest to the firewall of the vehicle. I highly recommend you remove the positive battery cable, because you are going to be working in some pretty close quarters here, and it's likely you're going to have some kind of short. Once our nut's off there, place our ring terminal over, and we can replace our nut and tighten it down. Now we can replace our fuse, put the cap back on, and we can get that zip tied off somewhere safe. Now we can slide our cover back over there, and we can get our air line ran back to our airbags. This wire loom's a really good thing to follow along with. That gets us right back where we need to go. Now you just be careful when you run your airline tubing. You don't want to drag it over any sharp edges so we don't have any leaks. And once we get to the front of the leaf spring here, I'm going to go over the frame rail. We can have it kind of on the inside of the frame here to work with. Now we'll trim our airline off here. We're going to add in our T. This comes with our kit. And we can run our line from our compressor directly into it. Now this van had an existing set of airbags. So we've got 2 individual lines on each side. If you were doing an airbag and a compressor kit, when you did your airbags, I would just loop one over to the other. I'm going to keep that in mind. It can make routing a little bit easier in this situation. Since it already had the airbags, we've got air coming into the driver's side bag, but we don't have anything going over to the passenger side. So we're going to tee off of this line and use our extra line to go over and tee into that line. Now these tees are part number F3025 in case you need them. I'm going to run it right over this cross member here. Now we're going to slide our vent on our airline here. And once that's on there all the way, we want to get it in a position so it's going to be semi-protected. So we're going to bring it up here. There aren't any really good high areas out of the way to get this mounted. So this will do, it's going to be behind this piece of sheet metal here, and then kind of up on top of the fuel canister. Then we can get it slid on our compressor. And we'll just turn that so that the top of the cover is facing forward. That's where most of the spray will come from. And we'll zip tie it off. All right, now we'll test it out, make sure everything's working, and pressurize the system. Now for a little extra protection, there's a few things I like to do. One's going to be filling the bottom of this relay plug with some silicone sealant. This is going to keep any moisture out of there. Moisture will lead to corrosion, and then you'll have malfunction. So we're going to coat that really well, get it in all the little cracks and crevices. And then to the top of that, where our connectors slide in, we're going to add some dielectric grease. This is kind of along the same lines. It's just keeping the moisture out of there. And we're also going to add some sealant to the grommet where we cut it here on the floorboard. Now also, if you pass through this grommet here in the firewall, you want to get silicone on that as well. Now we're going to slide the side panel back in position here and get it in place. Now to test out the system, we're going to turn on our lights. You'll see how the gauge is going to appear backlit. Now we've got that hooked up properly. Now we'll want to press up on our switch. When we do, we want to hear the compressor kick on, and our gauge will start building pressure. We'll take that up to about 30 psi. Now we can get all of our connections sprayed down and check them for leaks. So we'll just use a soap water solution, let it sit for a few minutes under pressure, and if we see any new bubbles forming, we'll want to address it. And with no leaks detected, that's going to complete our installation of the Firestone Air Command 1, part number F2158, on our 2017 Chevrolet Express.